Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back. This is week number 10 of our distance learning experiment. It's good to have you back. We want to divide our video up into two parts today. The first part is really just going to be a discussion of what happened these last couple weeks. It's a wrap up of our last unit on representation. I say wrap up because really our next unit is just a continuation of a lot of this work. The second part of the video is just going to be a conversation about what this week looks like. We'll get into the calendar and then we're out of here. So let's get into it. Last week we spent some time looking at Amiri Baraka's play Dutchman, and we learned about these two characters, Clay and Lula, and we saw the ways in which Baraka, the playwright, is crafting Lula as a metaphor. A metaphor for what, you might ask? And Baraka has been pretty clear on this, that as a revolutionary playwright, a civil rights worker in the late 50s and 60s, he wanted to create a story that would reveal to audiences the ways in which black actors and ultimately black people in America are treated by a larger kind of American culture. If we think of Lula as American culture, she is fascinated by Clay. She thinks she knows him, and she says, you should be on TV, because she knows people who are, his type. He's a certain type of person. But of course, Clay wants to break free from this mold. He is trying to seek out what W.E.B. Du Bois describes as self-determination. Du Bois is also cited in the Baraka poem that we read, Why Is We Americans? So when Clay finally stands up to Lula in this really difficult climactic moment toward the end of the play and says, you don't know me, and you think that you know me, but you have no idea. He is talking about blues singers and jazz singers, blues singers like Bessie Smith, jazz players like the Bird, who is, that's a nickname for Charlie Parker, a very famous alto saxophone player, whose music you should check out. But when he cites these musicians and he looks at Lula and says, you might listen to Charlie Parker play his saxophone, but he's actually criticizing you. You think that this is music for you, but it's not. It's music for me. And of course, he feels like he has more power when he stands up to her, but at the end, she reveals that she has the power in this terrible, tragic twist. So we look at this play, it's really unsettling, but as a work of representation, it's a very different story. And it's written by Amiri Baraka, an African-American playwright who is trying to represent himself in a response to representations of him created by people not like him for literally centuries in the United States, but especially in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So we take this idea with us as we move forward. What does it take for an artist, especially an artist who is part of a marginalized community, to take back control over the mode of representation? How do you do that? And has this been done in the past, aside from Amiri Baraka, and what does that look like? These are questions that are really at the forefront of our next unit, and that unit begins today, which is really exciting. So what I want to do before we get into the calendar is just talk a little bit about some of the instructional goals for the next 3 weeks, because we really only have about 3 weeks left of school. And then we'll talk about some of the major texts that we're going to be working with, and then we'll get into the calendar. So, all right, let's do it. So this unit is a film studies unit. If you've already taken the film studies class, then you're going to be in a really great position to check this stuff out. And if you haven't taken the film studies class, no worries. This is going to teach you some stuff about film terminology, and we can take some ideas and use those ideas as lenses through which to better appreciate some films. This unit is called What's Old is New Again, a brief introduction to film criticism. And it really focuses on this idea of the remake. We look all around us today and films are constantly being remade, even TV shows. And if they aren't remakes of some older text, they are period pieces like TV shows or movies that are set in previous time periods that allow us to apply our maybe cultural attitudes today back onto a place where those cultural attitudes didn't really exist, or maybe if they did, they were only held by a few people. A really great example of this is the Netflix TV show Hollywood, which I do not recommend you watch because it is extremely spicy. But if you don't know anything about this show, it's basically a limited miniseries set in the, I guess, early 1950s or so, where a group of Hollywood executives and creative types are able to create a film that talks back to a lot of this representational work that Hollywood was guilty of earlier on, only starring white actors, especially white actors who were made to play roles as people of color, or marginalizing writers, actors, directors who are also people of color. This show helps to kind of blow up that idea, and it allows us to take some of our cultural attitudes today and maybe reinterpret the past. We know that this is still a very popular mode of representation, remaking past movies, but remaking them in a different style or with a different attitude or mindset. And that's what this unit is all about. It's really interested in investigating how and why this happens. And so yeah, let's get into it. What I want to do really quickly is read through the introduction blurb and the calendar, and then we'll get into what it is we're actually going to be doing over the next 3 weeks. I urge you to check this out online too if you need an extra copy of this, but let me just read it out loud. Our previous work with contact zones helped to complicate our understanding of how a single story, or what Pratt says is a centered sense of knowledge and reality, can mask other less powerful voices. From colonial artwork to popular TV commercials, understanding text as contact zones gives us the ability to see perspectives that are not present on the surface. We can better account for the power dynamics that render them invisible. But what do readers do with this knowledge? How can we use this thinking to move from being cultural consumers to being cultural producers ourselves? This is kind of like Baraka, you know, like he sees all of this stuff, but then he decides that he's going to be a playwright himself to try and right these wrongs. Our next unit aims to answer these questions by looking at the process of artistic remakes, especially the remaking of classic film. I use classic here in air quotes because what is designated a classic is really kind of arbitrary. If you've ever been in an English class and you wonder to yourself, how is this dusty old novel from 100 years ago considered a classic when the book that I just finished last week is way better than this, but it's not a classic? How does this process happen? Well, you're in luck because we're going to answer that question. All right, designated something as a classic might make it seem boring, outdated, reactionary, or even irrelevant. But what if much of the popular culture that we consume today is in fact a continuation of earlier narrative, generic, or thematic traditions? This unit will use 2 films to raise questions about the ways in which meaning is constructed, adapted, shaped, and changed through time. We will consider the role of the critic as meaning maker and the role of the director as auteur, which is a word that not a lot of people use that much, but it's an important word to know, so we're going to define that later on. We will also examine other key concepts like camp, homage, pastiche, and parody, and we'll apply them in different ways. Finally, we will consider film as a mode of representation, just like the plays that we worked with earlier. And we'll think about the benefits and limitations for reading a film in this way. It's not just a source of entertainment, it is something that represents a big set of ideas. And if we understand it this way, not as some sort of passive, entertaining quality, but as a thing that changes the way that people think, the film becomes much more interesting. Moving from consumer to producer requires us to take what we know and make something entirely new. This process can be scary, but it can also be deeply rewarding and perhaps even empowering. So this unit will give us the vocabulary, theories, and practical skills we need to bring our projects to life. So let's get to work. All right, and by projects there is a final project where you get a chance to take all of this and make your own movie or short film. You don't have to do that, but if that's something that you choose to do, think about it. So we talked a lot about what we've done already. We talked about this new unit. Let's focus on some of the key texts that we're going to be working with. We're going to be working with 2 films. One, the central text of this whole unit, is a 1955 film directed by a man named Douglas Sirk, and it's called All That Heaven Allows. Now, this film is really interesting and has a strange history. We're going to talk about all of that. We're also going to be working with some film criticism by a number of writers, and we're going to be comparing this film, All That Heaven Allows, with another film from 2008 directed by a writer or a director named Todd Haynes, and it's called Far From Heaven. Now, I'm telling you all of this to kind of prime the pump, but I'm going to ask you something really important, that as we work with these films, it's really important that you go in cold. Don't Google these films. Please don't read up on them or read any other criticism or anything like that. All of that content we're going to cover, but it's important that you not know any of that when we first look at them. So avoid spoilers. All right, so we spent a lot of time building up some context here. I appreciate your attention. You're still with us. What we want to do now is look at the calendar, and then we're out of here. Week number 10. For Monday's class, you're just going to watch this film, All That Heaven Allows. You can find this posted on the website. It's in a Google Drive folder that's linked right there on the website. So just watch the whole film. When you're done watching the film, you're going to write a review. This is just like a review you might read online, but again, I don't want you to look at actual reviews online. I just want you to write your own review based on what you think about this film. And this is a review for a general audience. You can give it a letter grade or a number out of 10 or something like that. But review the film, post your film review to Turnitin.com, and that's Monday's class. For Wednesday's class, you're going to actually read a review. This is published in the New York Times from 1956. Read a review of All That Heaven Allows and compare it to your own review. You're going to ask yourself some questions like, how does the voice of the critic shape how we view this film today? And is your mind changed after reading other people's reviews of this film? We just want to think about this on our own. You're not actually going to post anything to Turnitin.com here, but you're just going to kind of do this work mentally. Now, you'll notice that Wednesday's work is pretty light as far as the time commitment goes, and Monday's work is a little more time intensive. So if you need to break this up in some way that better accommodates your schedule, you're more than welcome to do this. You just want to make sure that the review that you're writing and posting to Turnitin.com is turned in by the end of the week. So however you want to do that is cool. We spent a lot of time talking about some context. We talked about what this final unit is all about. We're going to be thinking about classic film as modes of representation. We're going to be learning some new terms and new ideas as lenses through which we can better appreciate, analyze, problematize all text, but especially classic film. So I look forward to this final leg of the journey. I hope you do as well. If you have any questions, post them to the group chat, of course. And yeah, until we see each other again, be good to yourself, be good to everybody else, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.